The crystalline spires of New Genesis Station caught the light of 3 distant suns, sending prismatic cascades through the grand assembly chamber. High speakers Zixtal, their silvery scales shimmering with bioluminescent patterns of authority, gazed out at the gathered representatives of the Stellar Confederation's 300-member species. In their 100,000 years of leadership, they had never seen the assembly chamber so tense. Order. Zixtal's harmonics rippled through the chamber, their voice translating simultaneously into 300 languages. We must maintain order. The Vorkath representative, a being of pure energy contained within an ornate crystalline matrix, pulsed with agitation. 12 species, High Speaker. 12 species have gone silent in the past solar revolution. The Confederation demands answers. A murmur of agreement, expressed through everything from subsonic rumbles to electromagnetic pulses, swept through the chamber. The millennial meeting of the Confederation, meant to be a celebration of their enlightened civilization, had devolved into barely contained panic. The diplomatic corps has dispatched observers to all affected regions. Zixtal responded, their scales flickering in what humans would recognize as frustration. We must trust in the processes that have maintained peace for 50,000 years. Ambassador Nyleth of the Silicon Consciousness projected a holographic display in the chamber center. Our analysis suggests a pattern to the silence. The display showed a spiral arm of the galaxy, with 12 points of light winking out in sequence. Each affected system goes dark precisely according to our communication protocols. No distress signals, no violation of our non-interference directives. They simply cease. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices. The Chlorophyll Collective's representative extended their vine-like appendages in alarm. The same pattern as the great silence of the precursor age. We all know what followed. Speculation without evidence is beneath this assembly, Zixtal interrupted, their scales now pulsing with sharp patterns of authority. We are not primitives to be driven by fear and superstition. We are the Stellar Confederation, the most advanced. The emergency broadcast channel crackled to life, cutting through all translation protocols with raw, unfiltered data. The chamber's holographic systems automatically rendered the incoming transmission. A civilian transport, the Star Dreamer, appeared in the chamber center. Its elegant lines were marred by weapon impacts, its hull breaching in multiple locations. This is Captain Tellerez of the Star Dreamer. The transmission came in all formats simultaneously: audio, visual, psionic, and quantum. We are under attack by unknown vessels. 800 civilians aboard, including larvae and seed forms. Our shields are failing. Another impact rocked the ship. Through the video feed, the assembly watched in horror as sleek, predatory ships of unknown design circled the transport like ancient aquatic hunters. Please, Tellerez continued, we carry no contraband, no weapons. We are a civilian vessel operating under Confederation protection. The Peacekeeping Committee's chairbeing, a collective of gas forms, spiraled in agitation. We must convene an emergency session to discuss appropriate response protocols. The Star Dreamer will be destroyed before we finish the opening procedures. Ambassador Nyleth protested, their holographic form flickering with emotion. Nevertheless, we must follow proper channels. The chairbeing insisted, violence, even in defense, must be carefully regulated. We cannot risk returning to the savage ways that nearly destroyed our ancestors. The assembly watched, paralyzed by procedure, as the Star Dreamer's engines flared desperately. Captain Tellerez's voice came again, weaker now. Is anyone responding? Please, we have children aboard. High Speaker Zixtal's scales had gone completely dark, a sign of deep distress in their species. They knew the assembly would debate, would follow protocols, would send strongly worded diplomatic messages. And they knew, with the weight of 100,000 years of leadership, that they were about to watch 800 civilians die. The attackers closed in for the kill, their weapons charging for a final salvo. The assembly had already begun drafting a resolution condemning the attack, even as it was still in progress. That's when the humans arrived. The TNS Armstrong dropped out of hyperspace like a predator breaking cover. Its hull, scared from recent exploration through an ion storm, reflected no light. A deliberate design choice that the Confederation's aesthetic-obsessed engineers would have found appalling. Captain Ashley Morrison stood on her bridge, her experienced eyes taking in the tactical display. 15 years as a Marine before joining the exploration fleet had taught her to read battle scenarios instantly. Talk to me, people. 8 hostile vessels, unknown configuration. Lieutenant O'Neill reported from tactical, his fingers dancing across the holographic controls. They're using some kind of focused particle weapons against the civilian ship. Hull breach on their port side, but their cores still stable. Morrison's jaw tightened. The pirates' attack pattern was familiar. She'd seen it during the Carbon Wars when separatists would target civilian shuttles. Status of the civilian vessel. 800 life signs, Captain. Senior Medical Officer Hayes called out. Multiple species. Biosignatures are fluctuating. They're running out of time. In the Confederation Assembly Chamber, the representatives watched in confusion as the unknown vessel appeared. Their sensors categorized it as barely Tier 3 technology, practically stone tools by their standards. Several representatives began drafting formal protests about unauthorized ships in Confederation space. This is Captain Ashley Morrison of the TNS Armstrong. Her voice cut through their deliberations. Hostile vessels, you are engaged in an act of piracy against civilians. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. The pirates responded with a burst of weapon fire that splashed against the Armstrong shields. Morrison allowed herself a grim smile. I was hoping you'd do that. Lieutenant O'Neill, show them why humanity still believes in guns. The Armstrong's response shocked the watching assembly. Instead of the civilized, long-range energy weapons they expected, the human ship launched physical projectiles, electromagnetically accelerated tungsten rods that tore through the pirates' shields as if they didn't exist. Primitive kinetic weapons, gasped a representative of the Silicon consciousness. They're using actual physical ammunition. Control, I need a solution for those civilian hull breaches, Morrison called out. Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice came back instantly. Already on it, Captain. Repurposing our mining fabricators to print emergency hull patches. Thompson's team is suited up for deployment. The Armstrong moved like no ship the Confederation had ever seen. Instead of the elegant, predictable maneuvers their combat simulations suggested, it fought like an Earth predator. Aggressive, unpredictable, exploiting every advantage. Morrison had the Armstrong dive straight through the pirate formation, scattering them, its point defense systems picking off their missiles with practiced precision. In the assembly chamber, the representatives were torn between horror at the violence and fascination with its effectiveness. They watched as Officer Thompson's team executed a zero-combat maneuver, using their suits' thrusters to cross open space to the civilian vessel, carrying emergency supplies and weapons. 3 hostiles disabled, O'Neill reported, his voice professional despite the excitement of combat. 2 attempting to retreat, 3 still engaging. Morrison's voice was steel. The ones running can go. Teach the others why picking on civilians is a bad idea. The Armstrong's next maneuver would be studied in Confederation academies for decades to come. Morrison had Rodriguez redirect power from their terraforming electromagnets, creating a localized gravity pulse that pulled 2 pirate ships into each other. The third, panicking, flew straight into the Armstrong's waiting broadside. In under 6 minutes, the battle was over. Civilian vessels secured, Thompson reported from the Star Dreamer. Multiple injuries, but their medical bay is intact. Their captain's asking to speak with you, Mom. Morrison straightened her uniform. Put them through. She looked at the scared but grateful face of Captain Telleris. Your passengers are safe now. We'll stay with you until proper authorities arrive. In the assembly chamber, silence reigned. High-speaker Zixtal scales showed patterns that hadn't been seen in millennia, the colors of change, of a paradigm shifting. They watched as the human ship, This primitive vessel, with its prehistoric weapons and barbaric tactics, did in minutes what their civilization had forgotten how to do over thousands of years of peace. They had just witnessed humanity's entrance onto the galactic stage, and nothing would ever be the same. The aftermath of battle painted a surreal scene aboard the Star Dreamer. Kate Wildcard Thompson moved through the civilian vessel's corridors, her armored boots magnetic locked to the deck where artificial gravity had failed. Behind her, 3 of her security team escorted captured pirates, organic beings in sleek environment suits that seemed more ceremonial than practical. "Ma'am," one of the rescued passengers, a crystalline being, approached Thompson. "Your combat efficiency, it was like watching the ancient warrior songs come to life." Thompson adjusted her tactical helmet, hiding a smile. "Just doing our job, friend. Been a while since I've had to board a ship under fire, but it's like riding a bicycle." She paused, realizing the metaphor would be lost on them. "It's something you never forget." Aboard the Armstrong, Chief Engineer Marcus Rodriguez had turned the ship's maintenance bay into an impromptu salvage operation. Pieces of the defeated pirate vessels lay scattered across diagnostic tables, their technology far more advanced than humanity's, and far less practical. "Captain, you're going to want to see this," Rodriguez called over the comm. Morrison arrived to find him holding what looked like an ornate energy weapon. "These pirates, their tech is Confederation standard, but modified. Someone's been stripping out the safety protocols." Morrison picked up the weapon, feeling its negligible weight. Ceremonial pieces converted to actual weapons. But why? And who gave them the knowledge to do it? "That's not all," Rodriguez continued, pointing to a gutted engine core. Their ships were running hot, way beyond normal specs. No Confederation engineer would ever take risks like that. "This is like something we'd do." On the bridge, O'Neill monitored the approaching Confederation peacekeeping vessels. Their designs were beautiful, all sweeping lines and crystalline structures. They looked more like art installations than ships. "Captain, we're being hailed. They're requesting permission to dock." Morrison straightened her uniform. "Granted. And Jack, tell Thompson to make our guests comfortable in the brig. I have a feeling the Confederation will want to question them personally." The first Confederation peacekeepers to board the Armstrong moved like dancers, their movements precise and elegant. Their leader, a tall being with iridescent scales, introduced himself as Investigator Venril. "We are grateful for your intervention, Captain Morrison, though your methods were unexpected. Pirates don't expect you to shoot back these days, do they?" Morrison's voice carried an edge of steel. "Makes me wonder why they were so confident attacking in Confederation space." Venril's scales shifted uncomfortably. "Violence is beneath civilized beings. Our society evolved beyond such primitive responses millennia ago." "With respect, Investigator." Thompson had appeared in the doorway, her armor still showing scorch marks from the boarding action. 800 civilians might disagree with your evolution right now." The Confederation team toured the Armstrong, their reactions ranging from horror at the weapons systems to fascination with the crew's efficiency. In the medical bay, they watched Dr. Hayes treat injured civilians with a combination of advanced biotechnology and what they considered crude physical surgery. "Your species," Venril observed, watching Morrison coordinate with her crew, "you maintain military protocols even on an exploration vessel." Morrison nodded. "Every human ship is trained for combat scenarios. We hope for peace, plan for war. It's kept us alive through our own darker ages." In the assembly chamber, the debate raged. The footage from the Armstrong had been transmitted across Confederation space. Some called for the humans to be censured for their violent intervention. Others, particularly representatives of species near the silent zones, watched the combat footage with growing interest. "They fight like the precursors," one ancient being whispered, its voice carrying the weight of millennial memory. "Not with perfect technology, but with adaptation, innovation, the willingness to risk." High speaker Zixtal watched the recordings again, focusing on the human crew's coordinated actions. They had expected barbarians with advanced tools. Instead, they had found something far more intriguing. Warriors who carried their combat skills like well-worn tools, yet showed no bloodlust, no aggression beyond what the situation demanded. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their balance. The Grand Assembly Chamber hummed with tension as Captain Ashley Morrison stood before the gathered representatives. The crystalline podium, designed for beings of all forms, felt cold under her hands. Above her, high speaker Zixtal scales flickered with complex patterns as they prepared to begin the inquiry. Captain Morrison. Zixtal's harmonics filled the chamber. You stand before the Confederation to explain humanity's approach to the Star Dreamer incident. Morrison's eyes swept the chamber, taking in the diverse array of beings. Her years of combat had taught her to read a room, and this one was divided. With respect, Speaker, I stand before you to explain why 800 civilians are alive to complain about our methods. A ripple of electromagnetic pulses, the equivalent of shocked gasps, moved through the silicon-based representatives. You used kinetic weapons in Confederation space. A gas-form representative swirled in agitation. Physical ammunition. Do you know how many treaties prohibit such primitive weapons? Morrison stepped away from the podium, her movement deliberate. Let me tell you about Earth's history. She gestured, and a holographic display activated behind her. Humanity spent millennia trying to kill itself. We got really, really good at it. Images flashed, ancient battles, world wars, the carbon wars. The assembly watched in horror as humanity's violent history played out before them. But here's what you're missing, Morrison continued, her voice cutting through the murmurs. We learned from every conflict. Each war taught us not just how to fight better, but why we should fight less. We carry weapons precisely because we know their cost. O'Neill, standing at parade rest behind his captain, noticed several younger representatives leaning forward, their attention fixed on Morrison's words. Your civilization chose to forget violence. Morrison's tone softened slightly. We chose to remember it, to understand it, to master it, so we would never be ruled by it. That's why the Armstrong carries weapons alongside scientific equipment. That's why we train for combat while exploring the stars. And what of the trauma to the rescued passengers? A bioform representative undulated in distress. The psychological impact of witnessing such violence. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, her medical data streaming to the assembly's displays. The greatest trauma we treated was from the pirates' attack. Once our security teams boarded, civilian stress levels actually decreased. They felt protected. The chamber erupted in overlapping arguments. Morrison waited, standing at ease, until Zixtal called for order. What fascinates me, Morrison continued in the silence, is not that we had to fight. It's that the pirates knew they could attack without fear of armed response. They knew the Confederation had forgotten how to defend itself. Ambassador Nyleth's holographic form brightened with concern. Are you suggesting? I'm stating it plainly. Morrison cut in. Someone is exploiting your peace. Those pirates had modified Confederation technology. They knew exactly how your ships would respond, or rather, wouldn't respond. And they're not the only threat out there, are they? She highlighted the map showing the silent systems. 12 species gone dark, their disappearances wrapped in perfect compliance with your protocols. No distress calls, no violence, no violation of your non-interference directives. Just silence. High speaker Zixtal's scales showed colors that hadn't been seen in generations, the patterns of dawning realization, of fear confronted. Humanity brings more than violence to the stars. Morrison's voice filled the chamber. We bring the wisdom earned through blood. Peace isn't the absence of violence. It's the strength to defend what's precious, and the wisdom to know when that strength must be used. The chamber remained silent as Morrison concluded. In that silence, ancient species remembered things they had chosen to forget. Younger races felt stirrings of something their ancestors had buried beneath layers of civilization. And in the shadows of the galaxy, where 12 species had fallen silent, something ancient and patient recognized that its task had just become much more difficult. The game was changing. Humanity had arrived. The Armstrong's tactical room had never been so crowded. Captain Morrison stood before a holographic display showing the 12 silent systems, while around her, representatives from 6 different Confederation species argued about protocols. The recent revelation had shattered centuries of peace. The Devourers were supposed to be extinct. Ambassador Nileth's holographic form flickered with distress. Our ancestors' records spoke of their defeat eons ago. Not extinct, O'Neill corrected, manipulating the display. Dormant. And now we know why the pirates had modified Confederation tech. They weren't pirates at all. They were scouts. Morrison watched as new data streamed in. 3 more systems had gone dark in the past hour, their final transmissions perfectly following Confederation protocols. No distress calls. No warnings. Just silence. They're learning, Rodriguez said from his station, where he was analyzing the captured pirate technology. These neural patterns in their ship cores, they're not just AI. They're adaptive. Every peaceful surrender teaches them more about how to exploit your civilization's rules. The chamber's lighting suddenly shifted to deep red. Lieutenant O'Neill's hands flew across his console. Multiple contacts. Emergence points detected in the Lyra sector. The tactical display erupted with new signatures. They moved like a swarm of ancient Earth locusts, geometric shapes of impossible angles that hurt the eye to look at. Where they passed, automated Confederation defense platforms simply shut down, their peaceful protocols unable to compute the threat. The Devourers don't just consume resources, Ambassador Nileth's voice shook. They consume civilization itself. Knowledge. Culture. They learn from each victory, using our own peaceful nature against us. Morrison's jaw set in a hard line. Lieutenant O'Neill, Signal Earth Command. Priority Alpha. Attach all our data on the Devourers' capabilities. The Confederation cannot sanction military action, one of the representatives began. Our laws will be irrelevant if we're all dead. Morrison cut them off. She turned to the assembled aliens. Your ancestors beat them once. How? Silence fell. Finally, Ambassador Nileth spoke. The precursors. They were, like you. They understood violence as a tool, not just an atrocity. But their knowledge was lost when we chose peace above all else. The tactical display updated again. The Devourers' ships were converting conquered stations into more of themselves, their geometric forms spreading like a viral pattern across the sector. Captain, O'Neill called out. Earth Command responds. Alert received. Defense fleet mobilizing. Hold the line. Morrison nodded. Humanity remembers what your people chose to forget. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. She turned to Rodriguez. Chief, those modifications the pirates made to Confederation tech, can you replicate them? Rodriguez grinned. Already on it, Captain. Give me 6 hours and I can turn their ceremonial defense ships into something with actual teeth. You have 3 hours, Morrison replied. Thompson, get your security teams ready for combat training. These people need to remember how to fight. The Confederation representatives watched in a mix of horror and fascination as the Armstrong's crew sprang into action. Weapons were distributed. Combat simulations began running. In the ship's cargo bay, Rodriguez's team started retrofitting captured technology. This goes against everything we believe, one of the representatives protested weakly. Morrison's response was steel. What you believe just got 12 species killed. The Devourers don't care about your beliefs. They care about results. And humanity's best result is surviving things that should have killed us. The tactical display chimed again. The Devourer swarm had changed course. They were heading straight for Earth. They recognized the threat we pose, O'Neill said grimly. They want to eliminate us before we can teach the Confederation to fight back. Morrison's smile was predatory. Then they really don't understand humans at all. Nothing makes us fight harder than someone trying to shut us up. The game of civilizations had entered its final phase, and humanity, the barbarians with starships, were about to teach the galaxy's oldest society how to be young again, how to be fierce again, how to survive. New Thermopylae Station hung in the shadow of a red dwarf star, its newly installed weapon systems glinting dully in the crimson light. Inside, Lieutenant Jack O'Neill stood before a holographic display of ancient Earth, showing the original Battle of Thermopylae to a group of bewildered alien students. "Your civilizations didn't just forget how to fight," he explained, pacing before the gathered representatives. "You forgot why positioning matters, why sacrifice can save more than it costs, why sometimes the best defense is a spear point aimed at the enemy's throat." The station's main training hall had been converted into what the humans called War College. Representatives from 30 species, the ones who'd chosen to fight rather than surrender, watched as O'Neill manipulated the display. 300 Spartans, he continued, against an empire. They chose their ground. Made the enemy's numbers work against them. Sound familiar? A crystalline being pulsed with understanding. Like the Armstrong against the pirate scouts. You used the debris field too. Exactly, O'Neill grinned. Battlefield control isn't about having the best weapons. It's about making every advantage count. In another section of the station, Kate Thompson ran combat drills with species that hadn't held weapons in millennia. Her security team had discovered that each race had forgotten strengths. The silicon-based beings could interface directly with ship systems. The gas forms could move through any gap in enemy hulls. The energy beings could disrupt electronic systems by their mere presence. "You're not learning to be human warriors," Thompson barked as she corrected a being's stance. "You're remembering how to be yourselves. Your ancestors beat the Devourers once. Those instincts are still in you." Chief Engineer Rodriguez had turned the station's engineering bay into what he called Improvisation Central. He stood surrounded by Confederation engineers, their horror at his modifications to their technology slowly turning to fascination. "Look," he said, holding up a ceremonial energy staff, now retrofitted with human targeting systems. "Your tech is amazing, but you designed it to be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of effective. Sometimes you need something that's ugly but works." Ambassador Nyla floated nearby, their holographic form showing signs of distress as Rodriguez deliberately violated centuries of engineering protocols. But they couldn't argue with the results. The modified weapons were testing at 300% above their original specifications. Captain Morrison stood on the station's bridge with high-speaker Zixtal, watching the training unfold. The Devourers had gone quiet after their initial advance, as if puzzled by the unexpected resistance they'd encountered. "Your people learn quickly," Morrison observed, "once they let themselves remember." Zixtal's scales showed complex patterns of conflict. "We chose peace so long ago, chose to believe that violence could be engineered out of existence. But watching your crew, we're not teaching them to love violence," Morrison corrected. "We're teaching them to understand it, to master it, so it serves life instead of ending it." An alarm blared through the station. O'Neill's voice came over the comm. "Multiple emergence points detected. The Devourers are making their push." Morrison watched as her students moved to their stations. There was fear in their movements, but also determination, understanding. The wisdom that came from accepting that peace and strength weren't opposing forces, but complementary ones. "Ready weapons," she ordered, and felt a surge of pride as 30 different species responded as one. The modified ships of the combined fleet moved into formation, their elegant lines now bristling with humanity's primitive additions. "They think they're hunting prey," Morrison said to Zixtal. "Time to show them they've walked into a pack of wolves." The Devourers emerged from hyperspace, their geometric forms distorting reality itself. They encountered not the peaceful surrender they expected, but a fleet that remembered its teeth. The galaxy was about to learn why humanity's first lesson had always been survival. The ice rings of Centauri Prime shattered as the first wave of Devourer ships emerged from hyperspace. Their geometric forms cast impossible shadows through the debris field, a swarm of viral machines that had consumed civilizations since before humanity's ancestors left their caves. Battle stations. Morrison's voice cut through the tension on the Armstrong's bridge. Remember your training. Remember who you are. The combined fleet hung in formation. Elegant Confederation ships bristling with primitive human weapons, their crews a mix of species that hadn't fought together since the age of the precursors. At tactical, O'Neill's hands flew across his console, coordinating with 30 different species tactical officers. Multiple emergence points, he reported. They're using our data against us, trying to predict our responses based on Confederation protocols. Morrison's smile was fierce. Then let's show them something new. Execute Battle Plan Thermopylae. The fleet split into 3 groups, a maneuver that would have looked like chaos to their past selves. The silicon-based ships dove into the debris field, their crystalline forms blending with the ice. The Energy Beings vessels took up positions near the system's star, almost invisible in its corona. And at the center, the most primitive ships, human vessels, and their closest allies, presented themselves as obvious targets. The Devourers took the bait. Their first wave struck at the central formation, geometric shapes shifting to optimal attack patterns. But humanity had learned warfare in 3 dimensions long ago, and the Armstrong led its fleet in a dance that denied the machines their perfect angles. Now, Morrison commanded. From the debris field, the silicon ships emerge, their modified weapons sending precise shots through gaps in the Devourer's geometric patterns. From the star's corona, energy beings pulsed with power that disrupted the machine's perfect formations. And through it all, humanity's crude kinetic weapons tore through shields designed to stop energy weapons. Their adaptation algorithms are going crazy, Rodriguez reported from engineering. They can't predict us because we're not following any single species tactics. Thompson's voice crackled over the comm from her position leading a boarding party. We're inside their command node. These things have never dealt with actual physical infiltration. They don't even have internal defenses. The battle raged across the Centauri system. The Devourers, for the first time in eons, faced an enemy that didn't behave according to logical patterns. Every time their swarm adapted to one strategy, the combined fleet shifted to another, using tactics pulled from 1,000 worlds and 100,000 years of warfare. Multiple contacts. O'Neill's voice rose with excitement. Earth Defense Fleet just emerged from hyperspace. They're hitting the Devourer's rear lines. The machines found themselves caught between hammer and anvil, the combined fleet's chaos and humanity's concentrated fury. On the bridge of the Armstrong, Morrison watched as species that had forgotten warfare demonstrated why their ancestors had once ruled the stars. Their command node is destabilizing, Rodriguez reported. Thompson's team got the virus uploaded. It's spreading through their network. The virus was a masterpiece of human pragmatism and Confederation elegance, a code that didn't try to defeat the Devourer's perfect logic, but instead introduced the one thing they couldn't process: uncertainty. Probability replaced certainty. Perfect patterns became chaos. The geometric shapes began to break apart, their viral perfection corrupted by the most human of concepts: doubt. All ships pushed the advantage, Morrison commanded. Don't let them regroup. The combined fleet struck from all angles, each species contributing their forgotten strengths. Silicon ships phased through debris to strike from impossible angles. Energy beings overloaded machine systems with pure thought, and human ships demonstrated why sometimes the simplest solution, kinetic force applied with precision, was still the most effective. When the final Devourer ship shattered, the silence that fell over the battlefield was different from the silence that had claimed 12 species. This was the silence of victory, of survival, of ancient species remembering why their ancestors had been feared. In the debris field that had once been a perfect geometric swarm, humanity had taught the galaxy's oldest civilization its youngest lesson. The strongest piece was the one you could defend. The crystalline spires of New Genesis Station had been rebuilt, but they were different now. Elegant lines were complemented by functional defense systems, beauty and strength intertwined. In the newly christened Chamber of Unity, Captain Ashley Morrison stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Alliance, what had once been the Stellar Confederation reborn through fire and wisdom. The silence has been broken, High Speaker Zixtal announced, their scales showing patterns of pride and determination that would have been unthinkable months ago. And in its place, we find not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of strength. Morrison watched as Thompson and her security team demonstrated combat techniques to a group of young representatives. In the station's engineering section, Rodriguez worked alongside beings of a dozen species, their modified technologies now officially sanctioned rather than forbidden. O'Neill had been appointed as the first instructor at the newly established Strategic Academy, teaching history that had almost been forgotten. We've received signals from 3 of the silent systems, Ambassador Nyleth reported, their holographic forms steady and confident. The Devourer's hold is breaking. Some of those we thought lost might yet be saved. Morrison nodded, remembering the cost of victory. The ice rings of Centauri Prime still held debris from both sides, geometric shards and organic ships alike. But from that battlefield had emerged something new, a civilization that remembered both its wisdom and its strength. The human concept of the warrior scholar, Zixtal mused, approaching Morrison. We're beginning to understand it now. Your species never forgot that peace must be strong enough to defend itself. In the station's massive viewing gallery, representatives from hundreds of species gathered. The newly commissioned ships of the combined fleet hung in formation, elegant Confederation designs now proudly bearing the primitive weapons that had helped save civilization. More importantly, their crews were mixed, each species contributing their unique strengths to the whole. We're receiving requests from across the galaxy, O'Neill reported during the evening briefing. Species wanting to join the Alliance, to learn what we teach. Even some of the oldest civilizations are remembering things they'd chosen to forget. Morrison watched as a group of silicon beings practiced combat maneuvers alongside human marines, their crystalline forms moving with newly recovered grace. They're not learning to be human, she observed. They're learning to be themselves again, all of themselves. The station's alert system chimed, not with warning, but with news. Another silent system had been recovered, its people emerging from the Devourer's control to find a changed galaxy awaiting them. In the medical bay, Dr. Hayes worked with healers from a dozen worlds, combining their knowledge to help the traumatized survivors. Captain Rodriguez called from his station. The first class of combined engineering students just completed their training. You should see what they've created. It's like nothing either of us could have built alone. In the Chamber of Unity, the new charter was displayed. Strength through wisdom, peace through strength. Below it, representatives of species that had once forsworn all violence now stood proudly with ceremonial weapons that were no longer merely ceremonial. We thought we had to choose, Zixtal said to Morrison, as they watched the combined fleet prepare for another recovery mission. Between peace and strength, between wisdom and warfare, between past and future. You taught us that the choice itself was an illusion. Morrison smiled, remembering the day the Armstrong had first answered that distress call. The strongest civilizations aren't the ones that forget their darker natures, but the ones that master them. That's humanity's gift to the stars. Not our weapons or our tactics, but our balance. As the combined fleet moved out, carrying hope to the silent systems, the galaxy's oldest civilization had learned its newest lesson. True peace wasn't the absence of violence, but the presence of wisdom strong enough to know when to fight and when to extend a hand in friendship. And in that lesson, both humanity and the stars had found something greater than either could have achieved alone. They had found balance. They had found strength. They had found a warrior's peace.